Hey guys, GhazzyTV here with another Path of Exile League Start video. In this one, we're going to be talking about the Absolution Necromancer Summoner for 3.20 Forbidden Sanctum. Now before we dive in, I do want to say that back in 3.19, minions had the biggest issue of minion survivability that they've ever had in the history of Path of Exile. This was later in the league fixed by the adjustment of certain monster modifiers of the Archnemesis to be toned down or completely not affect minions whatsoever. Going into 3.20, this was a major concern, but now that we've been told and informed in the patch notes that Archnemesis will be no more, thank God, we're going to be in a position where minion survivability will actually be at an all-time high. Now, this obviously doesn't help us out with any sort of damage buffs, which we're getting sorted through hex changes, actually. However, with the minion survivability being there, we're going to be in a situation where we can use the meat shields in a very sturdy and a reliable way. Outside of this, we have another couple things that's been happening lately for minions, and that is the introduction of minion-related gear. This would be in the form of such things such as bone rings, which can roll minion modifiers on your ring slots. We also have access to lower item level versions of the convoking ones, such as the convening and the calling ones, which actually drops throughout the campaign. These are obviously not necessity or needed or any sort of requirement through getting gear progression for the minion build throughout the campaign, but if you do get them, it actually feels absolutely amazing when you're playing the build because it scales your efficiency very, very well. Do keep in mind that the POB I'll be showing you in this video is from 3.19 version and is expected to be 100% the same after POB updates, but do check the written guide listed in the descriptions below, as it will always have updated information which includes POB links for all of the budgets, a leveling section, a gear section, and so much more. Speaking of much more, now that you're reading the descriptions down below here in the video and I got your attention, there's a sub button right next to it. Yeah, I was gonna check out who in the fucking video is watching is not sub. You haven't subbed. The low budget version is the one in the focus both here and in the written guide. It's capable of absolute insane damage numbers, even at the lower end of gearing. Do keep in mind that the playstyle offered is a bit slower in clearing, but brings out crazy high-end single target capabilities. But before praising it too much, it is fair to say that it is not for everyone. The playstyle is very much alike the dominating blow builds, which requires you to either kill, have the enemy die soon after being hit, or a % chance on hitting a rare or unique enemy to summon the Absolution Sentinels. Now, this can cause for some annoying delay in single target boss fights where you end up casting a lot without ever getting that Sentinel summon early on. Now, we are solving the potential problem this brings by having an army of meat shields covering us, which will work very, very well in the upcoming 3.20 Forbidden Sanctum League mechanic as well. As mentioned earlier, the written guide houses every single detail of the build, including in-depth leveling section, but it is fair to outline here in the video that Absolution is one of the most common choices to use for summoners leveling through the acts. This is due to the damage and reliable performance it brings during the acts. This allows us to not need to trade early act leveling speed to play the actual build, as we'll have it enabled as early as from level 12. This is the low budget POB for the 3.19 Absolution Summoner build. Do keep in mind that there might be some changes leading into 3.20, and obviously the guide will be updated fully before the league launches, so do check out the link in the descriptions below. Before we dive into the details of this, I do want to point out that the DPS, as you can see, looks kind of low. This is actually with 3 Sentinels. However, the POB DPS isn't always able to calculate proper numbers. In this POB for Sentinels for Absolution, this is actually the case. It's been determined that the low-budget versions of this build will do approximately 3 times the number that you'll see if you've set the calculations correctly. In the higher budget versions, we are expecting between 4 and 6 times the DPS the POB is showing, and in the very high budget version, it goes to 7 up to 9, sometimes even 10 times as high depending on how crazy gear you've got. This is a very hard thing to calculate, and as of 3.19, due to some of the minion changes, we are actually unable to do that specific math again. So if they make further changes, it's going to be very hard for us to calculate their actual DPS. So right now, this is as close as we can get by saying approximately 3 times the DPS. So, as you can see here, we have actually taken Eldritch Battery, and I want to point that out very early on, that this is not something you need to rush to until you seem to be having issues with mana. Do use a mana flask till you're actually starting to feel the mana issues, and when that happens, that's when you want to make sure that your leveling will go up here to take this node. Now, why would you do this? By simply having a little bit of energy shield from your gear. As you can see in the POB, I only have 407. That is more than enough to cover, because we actually never take damage on our energy shield, which allows us to recharge the energy shield. But also, thanks to this little node on the side, the damage we're doing with Absolution from our own casts will then be leeching energy shield back to us to sustain the mana cost of our abilities, which also allows us to reserve as much mana from our pool as possible for the auras. Now, before going into the full detail, I'm going to show you the leveling trees. In the early stage, I normally use things like either muling in a Pierce from the Ranger and going in with playing with Spark. You can obviously run with something like Freezing Pulse or whatever you feel like, all the way up to level 12. Doesn't matter what you choose to run, but at level 12, you will be able to run with Absolution from the start. In this section, we want to take the spell damage nodes into Enduring Bond for the minion-related nodes. Reason we do this is to help the extra damage that we're doing. Later, you're going to be respecking these nodes. It is okay to keep this once you change into Absolution, so don't start wasting any regret orbs you might find. Simply just respec them further down the road when you're getting the respec points from the actual quest you're completing. At level 40-ish, you don't want to go on the right-hand side or down to the Eldritch Battery node, but instead, we want to make sure we get Lord of the Dead, the extra HP on the Quick Recovery, which also gives us mana regen. But most importantly, you want to go up and skip the Mastery, but you do want to go up for Sacrifice, as well as Spiritual Command, and if you feel like you need more HP, you go for Discipline. But do pick up the Retribution early on. The reason we do this is because we can actually start using our Meat Shield zombie army very early on and actually have them reliably stay alive as early as Act 2, Act 3 by simply having the Sacrifice node spec'd. After this, we do want to rush through the Purity of Flesh nodes all the way in to pick up Righteous Army as well as Redemption. Once you have these two nodes, your damage will be absolutely crazy, and you don't really never have any issues with damage output throughout the campaign after this. Some people, myself included, sometimes like to actually spec into Spiritual Aid to further enhance the damage output, because our own damage will then also be scaled to help our initial kills. Later stages of this type of build in the end game of the maps, I don't really feel the need for Spiritual Aid myself, but in the lower budgets, it is fair to say that this is definitely an option that can help alleviate some pressure in the early stage of a mapping. Next step in the leveling tree would be the level 62 tree, and you can get all the trees here in the bottom left corner, and this is where we start moving up here on the side. At this point, you might want to go for the Eldritch Battery as soon as you can. You might even skip some of these life nodes, or skip the Aura Reservation nodes to get this first if you feel like mana is becoming an issue. This is obviously completely gated behind the amount of links you have access to in your gear if you're running with a Tabula Rasa, for example, or if you're having an early 5-link drop, or if the 4-link is just too much mana for you to muster with a mana flask. Obviously, the Cruel Preparation for extra resistances is very attractive, and you could deviate from what I've been talking about to get the Cruel Preparation early on if you want to. Other than that, it's just Life and Energy Shield together with some more Aura Reservation scaling, and then the final tree is all about picking up some extra crit nodes and giving some extra AoE for better clearing, and we're also talking about the possibility of going into the Sanctuary node. This is something you can choose to do instead of this tree if you feel like mana is not an issue. I would recommend strongly to go all the way down here and picking up the Sanctuary. That would help a lot when it comes to the actual resistances when it comes to scaling through the campaign. So if you skip these nodes as you can see here, that would be level 47, and instead taking this route and going like this would grant you at level 53 a lot of resistances by having a shield equipped, which can help alleviate pressure from your gearing when you enter Act 6, which will lower your resistance by 30% on the elemental resistances due to killing Kitava. So there are some options to deviate from the tree if you so wish, and it all comes down to the end, and it all comes down to the point of deciding how good gear you have, how comfortable you are with leveling. When it comes to the tree and the Ascendancy nodes orders, I would definitely recommend that you can start with Commander of Darkness if you feel like you want to further alleviate pressure when it comes to actually gearing. On the other hand, at the same time, the Commander Darkness does give you elemental resistances as well as damage, but it also applies to your minions. This extra minion resistance will help your meat shield stay alive for the endgame bosses throughout the campaign. And the next step would be to pick up Mindless Aggression, and I normally take up Mistress of Sacrifice as my Merciless lab, which would be the third lab. And the reason for this is, at that point, I'm starting to play around in the mapping stage, and my next goal at that point would be to get a trigger weapon so that I can automate my offering, which is going to be a bone offering to give ourselves this sweet, juicy block chance, as you can see. Bandits, kill them all, they don't give us shit, okay? When it comes to the items, it's very straightforward. The wand that you want to use is preferably a plus level of all minion skills or plus level of spell skills. Obviously, modifiers such as minion damage, minion attack speed, all of these kind of things would obviously be very beneficial. But even though a minion damage wand would, in many cases, become a better DPS output for your build than a +1 level of all spells or all minions, I still recommend the level of all spells and minions for the simple fact that it scales up the level of your utility minions and the survivability of your meat shields, so please do prioritize this type of weapon. Shield-wise, it is strongly recommended that when you start getting towards the red tier maps, you're going to start wanting to have a recovery on life on block shield. These can be somewhat expensive early on. They are not mandatory. You can use any sort of shield with minion stats, any shield with life, anything you feel like, just to get some extra stats, resistances, attributes, whatever you feel like. But later in the game mapping stages, you're gonna want to have a shield like this. Obviously, the other option would be to get a surrender. This is a standard issue option for many minion builds. Surrender seems to be very expensive early on in the league, which is why I am showing a rare version instead. Again, they can be somewhat expensive, not mandatory, something you're gonna want to upgrade when you start pushing the higher tier maps. Helmet-wise, you're going to want to have preferably a bone helmet because they give you extra minion damage, but the only stat that is important is HP, and if you can get one with +1, preferably +2 level of minion skills, that would be preferable, obviously. The build I'm showcasing in the PoE is super low budget, which is why we're using a tabula rasa. This is self-farmable or cheap, depending on how you want to buy it or get it. Algor Mortis, this is one of those things that is very preferential. You can choose to run this or you can choose to skip it. The way we utilize this is by giving us some extra energy shield, but also some resistances. But most importantly, enemies in your chilling areas take increased lightning damage. That is a crucial modifier. In the skill section, I'll be covering how we apply this. And by us applying the chilled ground, this allows enemies to take increased lightning damage, which will increase the damage output that we are doing. These pair of gloves is one of the first things that goes when you start upgrading the build, because we're going to need to make room for resistance related stats as well as defensive related stats. So the Algor Mortis, from my perspective, is mostly only used in the lower budget versions. You can use it in higher if you wish. Boots, generic. Armor if you can get it. Brittle on the Eldritch influences if you can get one. But life and movement speed are stats that are important. Obviously, make sure that you cover your attributes as well as capping your resistances, which is something I normally just add in the configuration and tell people that, hey, you're gonna have to make sure that you cap your resistances. That is also through two stone rings with just HP. These rings could be bone rings if you get some with minion stats. Again, to keep the budget down, I'm only showcasing these in the super low budgets. Darkness of the Throne, generic to go to choice of minion builds. Generic jewels with HP and minion damage. You can even have damage jewels that is flat lightning damage or even flat physical damage for the minions as well. Rumi's Concoction, it's a matter of personal taste here. Extra type of level of block for you. Do make sure that if you use a Granite Flask that you don't have another Granite Flask in the list, but instead run a Basalt Flask, preferably roll with a suffix that gives you increased armor, to make sure that you get at the very least around the ballpark of 30,000 plus armor. That is a kind of a good sweet spot, which will give you this juicy, effective hit pool. Other than that, the jewels are very straightforward. Some of these jewels, depending on the market, can be more or less expensive. Literally just buy something with a flat damage modifier or something with a lower flat HP to keep the cost down on these. It kind of bounces from league to league, so it's very hard to determine when they're expensive or not. So do keep in mind that there are several options out there. Skill-wise for the Absolution, we're going to put them in our body armor, and that is an Absolution linked with Spell Echo. Very, very important. Physical to lightning is one of the most important skill gems to use for the Absolution, and the reason for this is that Absolution actually deals 100% physical damage. Now, this video is not going to tell you and explain to you how conversions work, but they have an inherent modifier through the skill gem that converts 50% of their physical to lightning. By using physical to lightning, they also convert the remaining physical damage into lightning as well. They are still doing 100% physical damage, but when they're hitting something, it is converted and taken on the enemy as lightning damage. This means that the physical to lightning support that increases the physical damage actually increases the entire damage that they're dealing, and then converting that to damage to lightning, and then that lightning damage is then scaled with another 10% increase. So it's a very, very strong support gem. Minion damage, of course, and lightning penetration, used for this version without the Dorianis, for those of you who are looking at the higher budget versions. Summon Phantasm is something that will go away in the future PoB update because of another issue, which I'll cover in another video. Basically, the TLDR is that they made a change that was unintended, that accidentally made so that Summon Phantasm doesn't work the way it used to work, which apparently was an unintended way for it to work. So they accidentally bug fixed it. Anyways, we're not going to use Summon Phantasm moving forward for this character. However, Predator will still be there. And in the trigger determination, triggers weapons cannot trigger auras. So we're using a Desecrate and a Bone Offering to trigger this offering automatically before you get the trigger craft, which is from unveiled missions or unveiled items. You will simply self-cast it. The chilled ground I was talking about, we are generating this through a curse together with Vortex via an Archnemesis brand. This means that we don't actually have to cast it consistently ourselves, but rather cast out the brand on a boss target, and this Archnemesis brand will cast these for us. The changes that I'm expecting to see from the 3.20 PoB update is that the Mark curse might very likely be turned into a Conductivity curse, but more of that when the update's coming in. The Generosity Zealotry setup is very, very popular. It's something you'll be taking later down the road once you pick up the Eldritch Battery to allow you to reserve as much mana as possible. We're going to have a Convocation and Flame Dash, of course, and then we have our Feeding Frenzy generating minions, which in this case is just a pack of zombies, just for the sake of making sure we have some meat shields in front of us. In here we have Tempest Shield and Defiance Banner as well, and our remaining utility options is, of course, the Ray Spectre meat shield support together with an Animate Guardian and a Summoned Stone Golem. It is fair to say that you could move the Stone Golem out and move your Feeding Frenzy and zombies in instead here and skip the Animate Guardian altogether, if you so wish. In the lower budget versions that you might have noticed, I do not have Animate Guardian enabled. The reason for this is that a lot of people don't want to play with the AG on the lower budget versions. However, there is a video in the link in the description, or a written guide even in the descriptions below, that will cover every detail you have about the Animate Guardian, which will also be updated for 3.20 Forbidden Sanctum. I would strongly recommend to run an Animate Guardian and learning how it works, because it is so much value despite the Kingmaker nerf that we saw in the patch notes. Outside of that, there's not much more to tackle when it comes to the PoB. It's a very straightforward build. It does an insane amount of damage, and the higher budget version has been reaching absolutely crazy numbers. Lake of Calandra was one of the best leagues in the game to do this in the highest of highest budget versions. However, the high budget version outside of Lake of Calandra will still perform admirably. And if you decide to play this, do let me know in the descriptions below. Hope you liked the video. I'll cover you guys in the next video. Until then, stay safe. Keep rocking.